Dear friends and colleagues, welcome to our webinar series called New War and Peace, organized by the editorial board of the Caucasus edition. My name is Sevil Husseinova and I am a co-editor of the Caucasus edition. Our today's conversation focused on media and conflict discourse. This topic remains very relevant almost a year since the beginning of the Second Karabakh War. And for this purpose, we invited journalists as well as researchers from Armenia and Azerbaijan. Please meet our speakers. Afag Nadirli, she is an independent consultant, researcher of peace and development. Margarita Tadevosyan, she's a postdoctoral researcher at Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. Durna Safarova, she's a filmmaker and a journalist, a media manager at ChaiKhana Media, and regular contributor to Eurasia.net. And Aren Melikyan, a journalist and a podcast producer. He used to work for RFE, RL, and ChaiKhana, and other media outlets. And please meet my colleague, Philippe Gamagelian, who is co-moderating today's discussion. I'm looking forward to interesting conversation, and Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sevil. Thank you, Margarita, Durna, Afag, Aren, for joining us today. And of course, big thanks to the audience for finding the time to join us. A quick reminder about the format of the conversation. We will start with a short, about 6 to 8 minute introductory talks by the panelists. And they are divided into two topics. One is the impact, or rather the representation of conflict and war in mass media, and that will be covered by Durna and Aren, followed by the shift of focus to social media, hashtag activism, and the contribution of social media to the conflict and its resolution. And Afag and Margarita will talk about that topic. Of course, the division is somewhat conditional because there is no media without social media. So this is again somewhat conditional division. After that introductory 30-40 minutes or so, we will have a short discussion among the panelists that I will facilitate, followed by the final 30 minutes that we open up to the traditional now question and answer session. So if you have questions, you can see the Q&A button in the bottom of your screen. Just click it at any time and just post your question. And we will try to answer as many of them as we can in the final 30 minutes of today's webinar. One difference compared to the past, we made the chat window open to everybody. In the past, it was only visible to the moderators. At this point, the audience can also see each other and have a discussion there if you like. That's new, and we just are asking to, of course, remain respectful. And if not, if it crosses some lines and turns into either insults or attacks on individuals, we reserve the right to remove the person or the comment from the mix. But I'm sure we will. It will be a pretty good, interesting discussion in the chat window as well. Without much further ado, let me turn to the speakers, and we'll start with Durna and Aren. Durna, your 7-8 minutes.
Thank you very much for bringing up such an important topic and having me here as a panelist. Briefly, I will try to give general idea about the media landscape in Azerbaijan and how the conflict appeared in local media. Azerbaijani media faces numerous problems in terms of editorial independence, finance, and of course literacy. Censorship, official censorship in Azerbaijani media abolished in 1998. People expected more pluralistic, freer media. However, it didn't work, and soon after, early 20s, Azerbaijani media again became too of politics, and official censorship was replaced by the unofficial censorship or financial censorship, let's say. Whoever controlled the money, those controlled the media. Journalists were bought by the powerful representatives of government, or government officials started to become media magnates and control the media. Journalists were sponsored by the government in different methods, like having gifts, having houses, or having titles from the officials. This way, they were deprived from the objectivity, professionalism, and of course, independence. Traditional broadcasting media fully controlled by the government. There is no way of thinking, there is no way that alternative thought is being broadcasted on the television and radio. Critical voices appear only on social networks or alternative independent media or representatives of foreign media. So generally, media journalists are expected to be means of fostering national identity. It's considered to protect national security and national interests of the state. Actually, the vast majority of media representatives acts as defenders of national interests rather than simply telling truth about what's going on in the country or around the world. Therefore, it's not difficult to imagine how conflict is being covered in local media. So as a tool of information war, the media is like a battlefield for different sides. I will focus on samples of this information that appeared in local media. First, I will start with a report that I came across. There is a platform, fact-checking platform based in Turkey. It's called Tadevosyan. They prepared the report how disinformation, misinformation was spread throughout the media during the 44-day war, as we call it. This report examines 33 pieces that contains false information about the nature of the conflict, about the events happening during the war. Of the 33 analyses, 23 were flagged as false associations. In other words, approximately 70% of the images allegedly from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict were related to different events. However, with the size and impact of the conflict, different types of misinformation emerged. For instance, 4 of allegations were imitation and manipulation. 2 of these 33 analyses were fabrication categories, and 1 claim was in the category of decontextualization and distortion. Misinformation about the conflict that Tate platform encountered was in 8 different languages, including Azerbaijani, Armenian, and as well as Russian and Turkish. According to Tate's report, during the crisis, 18% of false information encountered was spread by various news websites. 28 news websites were involved in spreading false information. I would like to mention that Turkey's media outlets are quite popular in Azerbaijan, and in this regard, some news platforms from Turkey also play a big role in public manipulation through this information. I can name a newspaper in Yeni Akit, which is supporter of the ruling party. It was among the websites that spread disinformation. Why I chose it, why it was chosen actually was that they published 3 different false claims that were popular in Azerbaijan. For instance, they shared a photo showing Armenian PKK cooperation in Karabakh, or Pakistani Ministry of Defense sharing 3 states, 1 nation on Twitter, and Armenian flag being projected on the buildings in Dubai during the conflict period. It's also noted that the total number of visitors of news sites that share false or misleading content was about 28 million. I would like to touch the topics that I was following. Actually, these topics were quite widely discussed topics that contained disinformation around. First, Azerbaijani media during the conflict covered Najmuddin Sadiqov, the top military officer. There were questions around his presence. There were questions raised in the headlines like, did he die? Was he arrested? Was he fired? Did he flee the country? Such questions raised in the headlines, but when you open the body of the news, it remained either unanswered or unclear, or it was just sourceless claim. Then another point was about visuals showing mistreatment of soldiers. Some of these visuals were disproved sooner, but it's not related to the current events, or some of them are still unclear, where are they taken from, etc. Another case I would like to touch is about a missing person. During the war, there was an old photo of a person who was declared missing in 1992. He was 18 years old at that time. We got information that Azerbaijani soldiers found him alive in the basement of a building in Fizuli district. And this information was spread quickly, and they wrote that he's brought to Baku and he's going to meet a family, etc. But just a day later, government disproved it, saying that it's not correct. However, I was trying to follow this news and understand where it came from. There was everybody referred to a photographer who was who wrote about it on his Facebook, but this page is still not there. I could not find to check this information, but still there are people who believe that this is true, but the government didn't want to approve it. The interesting thing is such information also being circulated by the journalists, social media pages. It's not just about writing piece for the news outlet, but also to circulate such news on the social media as if it's not related to their job. Another case I would like to touch is happened in July 2020, when the first shootings started at the front through WhatsApp. I have to mention that WhatsApp is one of the main disinformation sources for people. Through WhatsApp, there was a provocative voice message of a man who appealed Azerbaijanis. There was nothing about this man. No one understood who he was. He's appealing to people, but there was just emotional appeal. Later, few days later, he appeared on the video appeal, and immediately media shared this video appeal as if he's Armenian, and it was mentioned like he's found finally. See how Armenian guy sharing provocative voice about huge loss in the army. And some days passed, and this guy wrote a post on Facebook that he's not Armenian, he's Azerbaijani, he's residing in Germany, and he's patriot, etc., etc., etc. After this, none of the media platforms apologized or at least silently removed the misleading content from their website. So it's still existing there as if it's true. These are the main cases that I would like to share. It's important to highlight that information sources are really important. When we read the news, it's important to understand where they got this information. In this, during the war, social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, WhatsApp became almost primary source for journalists. They relied on social media information data, and I think it's more risky than just republishing the statements of government representatives without the other perspectives or angles. On social media, we saw public figures, politicians, or some phenomena writing such contents. Posts like, I'm receiving good news regarding advancements of the army, and yeah, I got it from close friends living closer to front line, etc. And we see immediately media started to repost this such posts. Even I saw some of them shared news link under this post that, you know, we are like reporting it first, etc. So it was a bit like rushed to share scandalous or breaking news without checking whether it's true or not.
No, so apologize. It's extremely interesting presentation, but we are running out of time. Can you try to finish in a minute or so?
Yes. So when it comes to conflict like conspiracy theories or not check information, media is really not accurate, and since most of the this media outlets has lack of source in the front line, what's going on there, they just spread what they have seen on the social media. In short, it's the government disinformation and narratives being more popular than the real investigative reportings or critical voices or real expert analysis. As a result, we see that media is lacking from its role as a mediating between sides, and all these mentioned problems, of course, contribute to the deepening of image of enmity and dehumanization of other. And one small thing I would like to mention is that luckily there is a new platform established in Azerbaijan. It's called Patriotism, like meaning like check the fact. During the war, it played quite an important role to introduce what was correct, what was fake in regards to the war. And it was important mean to combat false information. Yeah, I will finish here. It's quite wide topic, but we can touch some important points during the discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And indeed, we can talk really a long time because the topic is very vast. And yes, we will have a follow-up discussion, of course. So hopefully we'll hear more from you. Thank you very much, Afag and Aren. Oh, sorry, Durna. Thank you. Aren, your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity and this discussion. Actually, it has been almost a year, and it's a good time to analyze what happened. I mean, in the sense of the work of the media. Well, the war brought up all the social injustices very quickly, and all the social problems, including one of them, the unprofessionalism of the local media. And among a lot of problems, I would like to start with one very important for me, which is the normalization of the war. I remember it was the 11th day of the war, and one of the leading Armenian TV channels was broadcasting from Nagorno-Karabakh. And the report was entitled An Ordinary Day in Stepanakert. By this, media was creating like an attitude that they are covering something normal, while it wasn't normal. Like literally a few hundred kilometers away, thousands of people have already died. It was the 11th day, and more people were going to die soon. And still, the media was showing that something is normal happening. I used to say that we got used to this so much, so it feels like a weather forecast for us, that we used to listen in the end of every news program something related to the conflict. But being used to something and accepting it as normal are different things. I understand that all the media representatives that were working on the field, and both in Armenia and in Azerbaijan, both grew up and have been raised in societies where kind of glorification of war is something normal, and those people brought their stereotypes and approaches to war to their reports on TV or on the radio. But still, I believe that journalists could do more, and to show more professionalism while covering such an important and inhuman event like a war. And the place we failed, I think, was that understanding that there is no single truth here. And I'll talk about the Armenian media, but I'm pretty sure that the same happened in the Azerbaijani media too. The majority of mass media didn't give people alternative truth. They were recreating the main narratives and stereotypes in the media. And this is one of the cases when they were trying to cover a problem, but by covering that problem, they were becoming a part of the same problem. And all the hatred that the media was full of definitely had its influence on the societies. And maybe another big problem regarding to this, which kind of leaped off the page, the unprofessionalism of a lot of media representatives, was the fact that some people really had some difficulties with distinguishing or separating patriotism and professionalism. Because I remember both during the July escalations and the 44 days war, there were a couple of correspondents who were working from the field while wearing military uniforms. I'm not even talking about the safety part of this kind of decision, that it endangers their life, but the perception of their audience and how it can be subjective, report and give information subjectively without any bias when you are wearing a military uniform. And by this, you want to show your audience that you are a fighter. Yeah, the audience really like that. They are cheer that, they respect you for your decision. But to my mind, this is pretty far from being a professional. Maybe that's the reason that some of people who couldn't get information properly from the local media turned their eyes on the international media. Yeah, and on the other hand, we had that problem while seeing that we can get more information from international or foreign news agencies working from the field. A very good example, I remember that no single footage or report about a funeral of an Armenian soldier was broadcasted on TV. No any media was talking about that. No images, no representation of that. The single time the Armenian TV showed funeral of an Armenian soldier was the time when the Armenian Prime Minister visited the mourning family. So that became an event to cover. But people were not even seeing how that hundreds and thousands of people were dying. And that's why we're trying to find alternative footages from the international news agencies. Because, for example, BBC, Deutsche Welle, and other international media outlets were covering the funerals too. And this leads to an immense decline of the trust of at least Armenian audience in the media. IRI in May, if I'm not mistaken, did a survey which showed that approximately 60%, if I'm not mistaken, well, at least more than a half of the population do not trust any single media. And of course, it starts like that because the media told them that they are going to win. And after 44 days, they saw that it was a complete lie. And they are blaming not the media, but the journalist, which makes a lot of problems for journalists. For example, like this morning, the parliament, at the parliament, the session started at the National Assembly with a small protest. It was an action of journalists who were kind of trying to protest and demand their rights while covering the National Assembly, because there are some limitations now. And I was reading the comments under the live broadcast. And people were literally blaming everything on journalists, because like, yeah, that's right, that your rights are limited and you shouldn't do so, and using like the worst, the last swearing words. So this is another indicator to show how media, how people do not trust in the media anymore. And still, another reason, of course, are the fake news. And Durna shared with us a few really good examples. Armenian media was also full of disinformation and fake news. And until now, especially regarding the aftermath, because mostly financed by the opposition parties, those media outlets are trying to create in Armenia kind of a dreadful atmosphere, an atmosphere of fear. And by filling the void, I'm using the word void because there is a problem of transparent state policy to filling the void with fake news regarding the enclaves and the documents that was signed on the 9th of November. And people do not want to hear things that do not sound pleasant to their ears. A few kind of experiences or tries to show the opinions on the other side of the border, usually really criticized by the Armenian audience. Whenever you are writing something which shows like the opposite approach or their ideas on the topic, they comment you like, they call you a foreign agent, a traitor, something like this. And this has been happening for at least 30 years. This is another reason why on the night of the November 9, people were really shocked, because they were kind of, there was a lack of getting information from the other side. And I really believe that even if there are small groups of journalists who are really interested in this, should kind of go an extra mile and put a lot of effort by covering the conflict in a more comprehensive way, because it's not only about the incidents that are happening right now, but especially my generation and the new generation even doesn't know how the conflict has started. So maybe more comprehensive coverage of the topic and the conflict would be really helpful for both societies. I see that I'm running out of the time, so I'm trying to wrap up. Yeah, that's it, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Aren. Let's now switch gears a little bit and focus on social media, kind of second part of the media conversation. Afag?
Thank you very much, Harry. So as you and colleagues mentioned, social media has proved to be an important part of our lives, and we have witnessed recently that it became a space of where information war was happening. me with several colleagues, we tried to see who was setting the agenda on social media and what were the sentiments of ordinary users to what they see, what kind of posts they see on social media. So we specifically wanted to see the situation separately on social media, separately from mainstream media, to see kind of a broad picture of what different kind of actors bring to the agenda and what ordinary people might think about it. So I had a chance to select and monitor up to 60 social media pages in the period between, actually back to 2019 and till the beginning of 2021. Just to mention here one thing, we focused on internal agenda and we did not monitor what was happening on international pages where a lot of arguments of Azerbaijani and Armenian users were happening. So we took Facebook and YouTube, as these are the platforms used primarily in our region. We tried to make our sources as representative as possible. So we selected the most active, the most popular pages or public accounts. And we traced the number of reactions, comments from social media users to their posts, covering specifically the Nagorno-Karabakh agenda. So we looked at pro-governmental, pro-opposition, independent sources, as well as conflict experts and peace builders. So we also looked at the sentiments of their posts and the sentiments of people's comments. We found out, well, one of the primary findings that we have is on both sides of the conflict, the agenda can be really different, despite the same thing happening. Like we have one common conflict, but the agenda on both sides can be really different. So what is important for one side is not really covered on social media by the other side and vice versa. As an example, I can mention the recent, this is data that I have from the beginning of 2021. The most discussed issue in the Armenian segment, for example, was the question of detainees, prisoners of war, but this same question in the Azerbaijani segment was barely ever discussed. And if I take another example, the question of internally displaced people in the Azerbaijani segment of social media seemed to be really important for all the periods that we had a chance to monitor from 2019 to our days. And the question of internally displaced people in Azerbaijan was barely ever talked about in social media in the Armenian segment. Our findings demonstrated that the share of external influence to the conflict was really overwhelming, especially from third parties, third countries like Russia. And it did not appear, during the war or after that. It was there all the time, at all times. It was there back in 2019 and probably before that. The sentiments of social media users was that Russia's sole influence and will can, resolve the conflict much more than, for example, even Armenia, the Armenian government. And it's believed by the social media users that the Armenian government is not capable of pursuing the independent policies, particularly when it comes to resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Another external player, the OSCE Minsk group, was really mentioned very few times during all this period, and this seen both in the posts of agenda setters on social media and the public at large. It showed that there was really little expectations and little hope that the Minsk group will bring any tangible results in official negotiations. We saw that the main agenda set on social media proved to be the pro-governmental sources. However, they could not generate discourse. They could not receive many comments or reactions as much as independent or pro-opposition sources. And I'm sure that these categories of sources that we're monitoring are well aware of this fact. The situation slightly changed after the war, but the general picture stays the same. And also, when we talk about the sentiments of social media users, we try to see specifically how much hate speech was used in the posts and in the comments of users as well. it was a good indicator that in the post it was not used almost at all on social media, and by commenters it was really surprisingly used not as much as we might think of it. Usually it was not more than 3 to 8% of all the comments that we monitored. Of course, we do not know how many of these comments are organic, are real people, and how many are trolls, but still the situation, the picture was not as bad as we could think about it. When it comes to what fuels the hate speech among social media users, we found out that separate events fueled it much more than the situation in general. Specifically, when representatives of two countries meet, this is one thing that really brings to a lot of hate speech. And it really seems that as our societies have been long separated, as there was no communication, any kind of communication between representatives of both nations, be it officials or be it ordinary people, bloggers, journalists, and other people, this would really be in the attention of ordinary users, and they would tend to express hate speech in the comments to these events. There were really many findings in our research, but these are the main findings that we have in a nutshell. So our main finding was that both in media, like repeating the trends on media, social media's trends, is that the stories shared are different on one side and the other. And people have different stories to react to or to comment about. And this creates different stories in their minds about the conflict. This is it in a nutshell. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Afag. Yeah, really this topic of two very different narratives I've been observing for many years, both in social media and in real life. And Armenians and Azerbaijanis meet. Really what's important for one side seems to be absolutely not even known as a topic or as a problem for the other, and vice versa. So we have two very different narratives, unfortunately. Thank you very much. Margarita?
Thank you. I thank you for this opportunity, and I want to say that I'm coming to this conversation not from a journalistic background. I'm not a journalist. I'm a conflict resolution practitioner, and I research and narrative development as part of what the thing that interests me scientifically. And obviously, the Nagorno-Karabakh war, the second war that started in September, was no different than any other kind of mobilization campaign around the world that invites the ordinary citizens to engage in social media activism and engage in hashtag activism. One characteristic in terms of, and I will specifically speak about the Armenian media, social media space, with no, with very little kind of attribution to what the Azerbaijani side was doing. Particularly because my recent research focused around the looking at the Armenian social media space. So immediately, as the fighting resumed, one of the many hashtags were trending. One of the hashtags that was trending within the Armenian space was "Haghtelueng," we will win. It was in the Armenian language or hashtag using the Armenian script. That became instantly very popular. Popular not only among the social media users, but also it was on TV screens. It became logos of many different posters and media campaign within Armenia. And a lot of people around within Armenia and within diaspora was using and kind of resharing the hashtag. The peculiarity of this and why I am focusing on this one particular is that it was targeted if other hashtags, again, that were trending during this time, like Stop Azerbaijani Aggression, Stop Erdogan, Artsakh is Armenia, everything that were in English and were mostly call for action to international community, was about raising awareness around the conflict, was pushing for a particular political agenda or trying to generate support, mobilize, fundraise, and all of that. The Armenian language hashtag was mainly and exclusively, I would say, targeting the internal audience in Armenia or the Armenian-speaking audience outside of Armenia. So the interesting part is that when I did the research and I kind of asked about 240 respondents who participated in the survey, overwhelming majority, over 60% of people, regardless of their age, gender, education background, were not only aware about the hashtag, but were actually actively using it, which indicates that Armenian public was not only passive consumer of the narrative that was developing, but was actively participating in co-creating of that narrative. For example, the hashtag was used, and this is like from September, well, it's until like April for Twitter, but historically, again, this was the data was compiled in April, but 222,000 times it was used on Facebook, 283,000 times it was used on Instagram, different variations of it, obviously, and 288,000 times it was used on Twitter. So we can see that there was a significant presence of the hashtag activism and the usage of hashtag within the Armenian space, which also signifies, again, like talking about social media and engagement within the creation of the narrative. It is important to kind of underline that there was this separation. Well, Armenian public at least conceptualized the victory or participation in the conflict in very multi-dimensional way. That the victory, again, like the meaning of Hakhteluing, right? The victory was not only the victory on the battlefield, but also it was the modern warfare implies also media media battles and cyber battles. So participation in this type of activities was seen as part of their participation or contribution in the justified cause for victory. As it happened previously, one of the largest, known Facebook groups, the Armenian Cyber Army, that at some point had, I don't know how many now, I haven't really followed them, but at some point they had around 8,000 active members that were the entire purpose of the group was to defute or debunk information that was coming from the other side, provide what was quote unquote presented as the true information, as the alternative to kind of media propaganda. That was a very active, again, participation, and in a lot of ways, Armenian public conceptualized participation in this type of groups as like being the cyber soldiers and supporting the conflict in that way. I think the interest towards social media engagement does not only come, for example, from like local researchers as well. Australian Strategic Policy Institute, right between the September 27th and September 29th, they did a research trying to identify and kind of follow the media narrative, social media narrative that was developing, exclusively, obviously, focusing on Twitter as a more international outlet for engagement. And within that period, again, like different like hashtags that were trending, you can clearly see where they were coming from. If it says like "Stop Azerbaijani Aggression," that's obviously pro-Armenian kind of users. If you say "Stop Armenian Aggression," that's obviously coming from the Azerbaijani side, or like a side that is supporting Azerbaijan. But what's interesting is that how quickly public on both sides have jumped or realized the importance of social media in creating narrative and fueling the conflict through, again, recreation of stereotypes and hate speech. The same Australian Strategic Policy Institute, within a very short time frame, again, in the span of 3 days, they were able to identify 7,000 newly created, highly suspicious accounts on both sides, like 7,000 in general, like combined number, that were they jumped on the wagon of, again, like retweeting and creating content that would support one or the other side. I think, if I'm not mistaken, at some point through the engagement of the Armenian cyber, again, I don't know, professionals, I think Facebook took down a significant amount of fake Azerbaijani accounts. I'm sure something like that happened also on the other side, which was not, again, publicized within the Armenian social media space. What do I would say, if previously, right within the 44-day period, everything was around creating a narrative about the conflict itself and trying to generate support about the just cause of one or the other side. As Afag mentioned, with the November 9 agreement, the conversation completely shifted, and it shifted for the Armenian side. It was the social media trend. Again, I'm leaving out the election, which is a separate thing that needs to be discussed, but the main trend there is about cultural heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's about the prisoners of war and human rights situation in and around Nagorno-Karabakh issue. So those are, we can see the clear shift in the narrative. Even, again, it is still framed in a very binary terms. But again, right now, the majority of social media posts are around prisoners of war and the cultural heritage sites and the human rights issues that people in Nagorno-Karabakh and within even the Armenia proper, with the border uncertainties are facing right now. And I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Margarita. Truly important, fascinating presentations. As I understand, some of you also have research on these topics, so we will be happy to publicize, because it's really important work in understanding the way conflict narratives function. I wanted to pick up from the way where we ended, in a sense of the thinking of media discourse as a conflict narrative, right? So this is where the conflict is really understood, promoted, discussed. It is either media or social media. This is the main public space right now. And at the very least, we see the two types of problems. One is truly important human rights concerns, such as problems of the displaced people in Azerbaijan, prisoners of war in Armenia. Unfortunately, it's just only seen as in the interest is only on their own side. There is very little attention given by each side to serious human rights problems on the other side caused by ourselves. But that's the kind of almost understandable smaller part of the problem. The bigger one that you were discussing, it's the narrative that crosses directly into hate speech and the serious kind of support for war. And this is what I really want to discuss, is somehow the conflict narrative, the support for war, is extremely popular as a narrative. And anything that talks about normalization, peace, not only in post-war period, but throughout 20, 30 years we observed, is extremely unpopular. As Margarita, you were just discussing, anything that was supporting the war, like popularly was supported. It wasn't only done by government propaganda, that might have been the initial drive, but people are willingly participated, right, in any kind of hashtag or any kind of social media movement in favor of the war on both sides. All the research also shows that there was pro-war overwhelming sentiment. So it's genuinely popular. And yet anything that talks about peace or normalization or an attempt to stop the war either now or in the future is extremely unpopular. Especially in the last few years, we can see there is stigmatization of any kind of activism, actually, but particularly peace activism. There is a direct attacks now in each society against anybody who is trying to engage in peace activism or overall in any kind of activism or NGO work. So since you've done this research, let's start with Margarita and Afag, but Aren and Durna, you're also welcome to contribute. How would you explain, why is this more humanistic? Yes, so looking into human rights in general, looking into normalization that will prevent us from other 10,000 people dying in another year or two. Why is this so unpopular, and what are we essentially as a community of people doing wrong? But this obvious message doesn't seem to resonate.
If I may start at least getting a first stab at the at this question, I would say that yes, you're right. Like for the past 25 years, there was no conversation or any conversation around like peace, reconciliation has been kind of not popular and has been always criticized in one way or another. Again, like my personal perspective or like professional perspective in this case, is that we never had a substantial and meaningful conversation what peace or what reconciliation means. Right after the war, we had another kind of webinar about like what are the possibilities of reconciliation, and immediately reconciliation was equated to giving in for like another giving something up. And I think it is very difficult for people thinking about war. It's pretty black and white. You understand what war is. You understand bullets, tanks, people killed. Those are like very visible things that you can see and understand. While when it comes to peace and reconciliation and how to get there, those are more like vague concepts that never on any side within education system, within the public discourse, within the political discourse, there was never conversation about those things. And it's very difficult for people to actually make sense what those terms mean, and in very much, and I'm sure like I can say with high confidence in both societies, when you say peace or like making peace around Nagorno-Karabakh or reconciliation, it immediately equates that we're gonna lose something. It's not gonna work the way that we want. It's framed in a very maximalist terms. That's why I think lack of this conversations creates this very narrow thinking of, at least I know what war is, and I will do anything to either win in it or prevent it. But it's, again, like this is like a very straightforward thinking. That's kind of my analysis of the situation.
Thank you. So essentially we see peace as a loss, as something we give up without necessarily gaining in it.
Yep.
Afag, anything to add?
Yes, I completely echo what Margarita said. I would say we really need to use the possibilities that social media are giving us. I know that after the recent escalation, we have several platforms that appeared on social media, which are trying to bring two people together. I know 2 of them on Facebook and Instagram, but there might be more. So I would like to call for people to search for these platforms, to join them, to join in conversations and try to really engage in lives of the people on the other side. What my small research has shown on social media, there is little, there are little calls for peace, that is true, but there are also very cautious, really confrontational posts on social media, and majority of the comments that we see, they are somewhere in between. They are neutral to negative rather than really openly confrontational or completely, conciliatory. So there seems to be a big room to work with these people, to engage these people, and peace building is a really long and complicated process. And the more platforms we have, the more work we put in this work. We have a number of peace builders who really would want to be supported to create more and more online work. So I would say we really need to use the possibility, a really big possibility that social media is giving us.
Thank you, Afag. Aren, Durna, let me actually expand this question into a bit different territory. Feel free to also react to this basic one, yeah, as in how do we, why is it that peace narratives are not popular? You were discussing something really important, both of you, earlier, that a lot of the journalists think of their duty primarily to be the national interests, and it understood in a very narrow nationalistic way. And that's somewhat paradoxical, yeah, considering that there have been decades actually of training. There were a lot of conversations about ethics of journalism, what is journalism. People are well trained, and of course, yeah, primary norms of journalism are about objectivity, actually about not harming. and so on. And yet, I also remember personally when we were doing trainings in Armenia and Azerbaijan a few years ago with journalists, and we asked this question, as in between objective truth, reporting the truth, and just following, let's say, the defense ministry directives or something very clearly propagandistic, what would you choose? And I would say about 70 to 80% of journalists were immediately answering without hesitation that we will follow the state line, we will do the propaganda. And there were a small number who would argue against that that's not the primary duty. So that's pretty consistent, right? So at least in our region, and you can see immediately once we have a war that that's actually how it plays out. The journalists put uniform on either physically or at least metaphorically, and effectively become soldiers. They don't necessarily do journalism, they do propaganda. So again, trainings didn't seem to help, right? So all these conversations we have in classrooms and everywhere else don't seem to do anything about that. So how do you see this? But I think it's continuation of this question of the nationalist narrative, the pro-war narrative is totally normal. That's what we all assume, most of us at least immediately assume we should do, as opposed to thinking that it might, doing objective journalism might either save lives or at least simply keep the population informed, right? So if you are, for example, losing a war as Armenia was, population knowing might not be such a bad thing, right? As opposed to having some imagination of some kind of a thing happening that's absolutely not true. So your thoughts about this, right? So if trainings, education is not then the way to go, how do we work with essentially journalism and turn it away from propaganda into journalism as such? Any thoughts?
So first, Durna.
Okay.
Yeah.
In my view, I think cross-border platforms, cross-border projects could be really helpful to overcome the stereotypes and to build the dialogues. There are several examples for this, that journalists write joint articles showing both sides in one piece, and fact-checking together, checking the language, the tone, etc. together. So I think this kind of stories can create atmosphere of dialogue and bring more journalists together to collaborate, to work. This can be helpful, I think.
Should I go ahead? Yeah, I would like to, if I have a chance, to comment briefly on the first discussion about why they do prefer war over the peace. Well, there are some very obvious reasons, and I'd like to mention like three not that obvious ones. I believe that one of them is the feeling of injustice. I'm not sure. And I see that it can happen on both sides. And what happens when we face injustice, we want to fight it. And the thing is that those people are not represented the other side of the other view of justice. So maybe if they would have an opportunity to look at two possible justices, they could come up with an idea and balance that injustices. And this is very obvious, actually, if we are talking about the social media. There was another campaign of Armenians attacking international media during the war. Yeah, they were targeting international journalists, the biggest media outlets, and demanding to cover the war without bias. But when they are saying without bias, they're imagining their own view of not biased journalism. So this was another fight because they felt oppressed and they were fighting this way. So one of the reasons might be that injustice feeling. The second one is very simple, which most commonly named slacktivism, because most of the people who were kind of doing that all social army stuff, there were people who do not have anyone to lose, mostly. I mean, like a relative or a family member or their own life. Because, for example, the people I know that were supposed to be on the front line or they were waiting to be enrolled, they were pretty silent on the topic. And those who were safe at home, they are very loud at the same time. And of course, the third one is like gaining and losing audience, because when at that very emotional moment, you are using that to trigger the audience by kind of cheering the war and promising them a victory, you are gaining a huge audience, a lot of followers and likes. The same and the opposite happens if you are not doing that. And we saw a lot of cases how groups and Facebook pages opened during the war kind of to support the soldiers, later in a month or two just started to sell coffee or something, just because they opened the pages to gain the likes and the audience. And now turning to the question about the question for us was about the national interest, right? Yeah, I remember I graduated not that many years ago from Yerevan State University at the journalism department. And for 4 years, me and my course mates have been told that our mission is to follow the national interest. Whatever happens, our priority should be the national interest. All few voices to kind of resist that point of view coming from the lecturers and the kind of leaders of the department were oppressed. Because I remember a couple of times me and two of my course mates asked like how it can be like the main mission of the journalist. And like they told you that they call you like non-patriotic, they ask you to think twice, and you can even lose grades. So these people have been grown up by telling that their main mission is kind of keeping and following the national interest. And for example, in my course, there were 88 people. Only 3 or 4 from that 88 people had chance to be on trainings or something like that. The rest 85 that became journalists, of course, doing the national interest stuff. Yeah, this is my answer.
Thank you. So then education is a problem much bigger than I thought. Actually, I'm much more familiar with the history education, overall historical narratives, and it's a very similar challenge that a lot of the non-historians are very directly saying that the role of history is to promote national interest, is not necessarily to teach either truth or some kind of critical thinking, but it's actually to instill national pride and effectively do propaganda. So then it is, a lot of it is truly in the education, as you mentioned. Thank you. And just to follow up a bit, one last question from me before we turn to the questions from the audience is the fact-checking and the truth and so on that Durna especially mentioned. I know, Aren, you have been also somewhat involved in that conversation. Is that an overall censorship as well, right? So that's there's a lot of censorship happening of what's allowed, what's not to be said. And censorship completely shifted in the last few years. Right? If in the past, censorship meant in very directly some law or some kind of pressure from the government, let's say, to prevent certain things from being voiced. With social media, it's impossible effectively, right? So it's very hard to control that space. So the new version of censorship is effectively flooding the space with either fake news or not even fake, but just so much diverse information that any message gets lost. So it's a very different type of censorship, or is the attacks on the messages you don't like, people being threatened directly. So considering this shift and this change, how do you see functioning? So fact-checking, really the flood of information we have, it's maybe noble, but very hard to see succeeding task. So any advice to those working for normalization or trying to get their message across, but how to work in this new space?
One thing that I want to mention, I mean, you're right. We see like sometimes on Twitter and especially on Facebook, you see things that you think, Jesus, like how it actually made here, and like why so many people are sharing. So one thing that I kind of feel that it's impossible to fact check everything. And I don't think the role of people working in the peace building field should be fact checking, or even journalists fact checking everything that appears on social media. I think a lot of times, by engaging with just because how the algorithm works and just because how social media works, just engaging with it, even in an attempt to debunk or to point that it doesn't make any sense logically or in any other way, actually promotes that information and promotes it for other people to see in their news feed or become trending and be shared and reshared multiple times. So but what I do think that should be possible to do, and it's again, like, it's gonna sound very cliche, but I believe that every single school in the region, not only in Armenia or Azerbaijan, instead of arts and crafts class, needs social media literacy classes, in terms of to teach kids from young age how to do, like, again, how to engage with this type of information, how to make sense of this vast amount of information, because unless that's done, we will see all these crazy posts that usually don't make any sense, but somehow trickle down into mass consciousness and get even more twisted and fuel the hate narratives or the war narratives that we have. I think we do lack social media skills in general in the region. I might let all the journalist colleagues excuse me. I don't know if the current universities have social media literacy even for the journalists as part of their work. But yeah, I think that's, again, it comes down to education for me.
Thank you. And yeah, we are both in the US, and as I'm sure you know, I can assure you it's not only in the region. I think it's a pretty common problem. It's not all that different in the US. We saw, especially prior to the recent elections here as well. Thank you very much, all. Sevil, would you mind joining us? I see we have a lot of interesting questions from the audience. Should we follow up with that? You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank our contributors for a very interesting presentation. And yeah, we start from questions we got through Q&A button. And the first question: are there any analysis of the correlation between official propaganda and social media popular discourses? Yeah, who would like to answer to this question?
Could you please repeat the question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course. Are there any analysis of the correlation between official propaganda and social media popular discourses? Yeah, please, Margarita.
Again, like, I cannot speak about official correlation. In particular, I can speak about my kind of very narrow research that I have conducted. I can say that, for example, again, if we're talking about the Hachteluing hashtag, right? If we can see it as a very clear form of not propaganda, well, I guess propaganda in terms of like steering or like mobilizing public in a one specific direction. One of the questions on the survey that I asked was like, who do you think have created the hashtag? Who is behind the creation of the hashtag? And about 56% of the respondents said either the government or Ministry of Defense, like, again, one or the other, representing the government, even though there were other opinions saying it was created by active social media users or it came out spontaneously. But there was a clear, like, again, majority were very clear that it kind of was created on purpose to mobilize the public. The fact that over 60% of my respondents said that they have either used the hashtag as their profile picture, like the frame that comes on a Facebook as a profile picture, or have created posts using the hashtag, or have done both. To me, implies that they are not only are passive consumers of the information that is handed down through social media or other media outlet, but they're actively engaging in co-creating the narrative that comes with it. Again, they are not only, oh, like I see it, I have not used it, but I'm aware of it. But no, I actually take it on, I recreate it, and I create my own social media content. So I am not sure how much I can say there is a correlation, but I want to say that at least within the Armenian public space, both, again, regardless of their education or their age, or gender, again, obviously active social users mostly are in their like middle-aged population, but they were actively engaged in co-creation of the narrative in this sense.
This is a really big question. I think it's a really good topic for another big research. And I also do not have data on this, but this is why we actually try to research social media rather than media, to see what the different kinds of sources are trying to bring into the agenda. And it seems that even on social media, the pro-governmental sources are quite active with the number of their posts, but people really consume information from different sources, at least on social media. And they really get engaged in other sources rather than pro-governmental. That's what I can say based on my research.
Thank you for your answer. And the next question is about the cooperation between Armenian and Azerbaijani media resources or media outlets during or after the war. And this question actually was addressed in our chat box. And Aren also answered this question, but I would like to address it here in broaden audience. Could you please name such examples of cooperation between Armenian and Azerbaijani media outlets? Yeah, are there any cooperation between them? For instance, to do fact checking or to oppose some disinformation. Where there's some cooperation, that might be some international media or outlets or local ones. Yeah, Aren, please.
Yeah, I thought maybe Durna can talk about ChaiKhana, because ChaiKhana is the best example here for cooperation. And as an author at ChaiKhana, I had the chance to work with Azerbaijani colleagues too earlier. So that's the best option we have at the moment, I guess, because I can't recall any media outlet which is working on both sides of the border and cooperates properly. Yeah, there are some international media outlets that usually has correspondents both in Yerevan and in Baku, or maybe residing somewhere else, but Azerbaijani national. So they are kind of doing the collaboration, but I can't recall any media that works like literally from the two sides of the border. Maybe Durna can.
I can jump in and qualify the question a bit. The question was, for example, RFE-RL was the example cited, but can be others. So it's not necessarily cooperation in the sense of joint work, but if you're a journalist based in Armenia and journalist based in Azerbaijan, is there at least some exchange of information for fact-checking purposes, right? So these kind of things. Is this at least happening? According to the comment, it was happening in the past in 2000s, as far as we know. Is not happening anymore, even among the journalists working for RFE-RL and other effectively international outlets based locally.
Well, at least I know that BBC Azerbaijani service has its correspondent in Yerevan. So there is that kind of cooperation if the question comes to that here.
I can add region, like the international organizations covering the region. For instance, EurasiaNet also publishes stories written by Armenian and Azerbaijani journalists. So if the topic has two aspects in both countries, they come together and they work on the piece together, fact check, and collaborate on developing the story. I think I can mention also IWPR, Institute of War and Peace Reporting. I've seen several stories bylined by both journalists. As for ChaiKhana, yeah, it's different work. We are not news outlet, but we are doing, let's say, film, photography, or let's say slow journalism. And we also covered 44-day war, but through the, again, slow journalism perspective, like we had time to understand what's going on and to tell what is not on the news from the perspective of people. Yeah, we cover, we do joint stories, not just in regard with the conflict, but for the other topics like gender issues, women rights, and other topics that has like link to the Armenia and Azerbaijan at the same time, also including the Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something very short. On the other hand, I really think that at least the Armenian audience would be really interested in something like that, because there is no opportunity to hear voices from the other side. For example, the podcast series I was recording, and Sevil gave me a chance to talk to her too. And I remember that episode got the most engagement, because there is no chance to listen to what people on the other side thinking, translate it into Armenian. So I think that would be really important if that kind of initiative could be created, and maybe this is the best time for that.
Yeah, I fully agree. Thank you, Aren, for bringing it to agenda. We also don't have, I mean, in Azerbaijani media space, we also don't have many examples of speaking directly to each other on our local languages. Yeah, there are lots of international media who broadcast in Russian or English, but there are few of them who broadcast and give information in local languages. This is a very important point, I guess. And we also have the question about some joint platforms which emerged in social media during the war and after the war, and they are still functioning. Some of them are popular, and the question was where they can be found, and how they function, and what is their role. Yeah, what you can tell about some joint platform in social media.
I will tell about the one that I follow, which is called Kavkazский Перекресток. It's functioning in Russian for Russian-speaking people. And what they do is bring, if I'm not mistaken, they bring up ordinary stories from people on both sides. And I think their role is exactly this, to focus on ordinary communication between people. This is one that I can mention. How to find them? I think if you follow, one person on social media, which is more or less dealing with, conflict and peace building issues, you will automatically, this is called, we have a term for social media. I forgot it. When you follow one person, it will bring about, more and more people eventually on your newsfeed. So try to get engaged with people who are dealing with these issues. And one of the platforms I mentioned, if I recall others, I will write in the chat as well.
Thank you, Afag. Let me maybe ask the last question. Aren also mentioned very important point about unprofessionalism in journalism in our countries. What do you think? What should be done in order to overcome this problem? Yeah, for many years we still have this problem. Yeah. Please, Aren maybe, or other speakers.
Well, this is a very difficult question to answer because I still have to figure out for myself. And by saying that, I mean for myself to understand how I should become more professional. So I can't kind of advise the others, and it might be arrogant. But the only answer I have to this question is self-education, because we have really lack of education and media literacy. So the only thing we can do for ourselves is educating ourselves. I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Yes, someone else wants to add? Yeah, if not, actually we are running of times, and maybe we have maybe you have a little to add to your some closing remarks. Now, Phil.
Oh, thank you. I think a lot of interesting thoughts came up. Of course, some of it we probably all know by just observing, but really providing a research the way Afag and Margarita did, and in-depth knowledge the way Durna and Aren helped us with is extremely important. I think some really important questions came up about what should be researched further, such as about the link between the official propaganda effectively and what becomes popular. Is it really a direct connection, or how does that function, is an important question. And really the role of education, I think, was highlighted strongly, that really how much it is very much intentional and how much it does come from the education sector, at least for me. But I want to turn to the panelists and see if there are any concluding thoughts, any takeaways that you would like to mention before we wrap up.
I want to say that we need to be very vigilant in terms of how the conflict will, or the conflict narratives will develop. I think when we all started working in this field maybe 20 years ago, or more, about like 15, 20 years ago, social media, internet was not a thing then. It was easier to contain the narratives. It was easier to work with people around creating more reasonable narratives. And I think at this point we're sort of dealing with a wildfire that is completely out of control. You can't control it. It comes down to a debate of like putting complete censorship and banning one or the other media or social media platform, like censoring it. But again, people find ways around it with IP diverters and VPNs and so on and so forth. But I think what we, in terms of in a conflict resolution field, need to work more on how to engage social media platforms in a constructive way, and how we can stir information or like create spaces or pockets where constructive conversations can take place and can kind of replicate and multiply, creating a positive effect. I don't have an answer to it, but I think the negative information or misinformation is spreading so fast. I think the field has extremely difficult time even attempting to keep up with it. So yeah, that's kind of my very pessimistic takeaway for now.
Yeah, following up on education, we all, I think, live in a period where we start to understand that critical approach and cautious approach to everything, including social media and media, is vital. So I would just like to invite everyone to really focus on how we keep in mind that social media and media are designed in a way that they are hunting for your clicks, for your attention, primarily by negative news rather than anything positive. Keep it in mind and try not to, give in to this negativity that social media is bringing us, and really be critical about what you are clicking.
Thank you. And I want to remind that only about 10 years ago, when social media became really a major thing, the conversation was exactly the opposite. We were all extremely positive, thinking that this is it. This is the information got democratized, and this is going to help us break through the borders and all the isolation that Armenians and Azerbaijanis have. And really, we will now have a whole new era of peace. Now we are 180 degrees on the other end. It's all negative. It's all fake news. It's all hatred. Let's accept the truth is somewhere in between. It does both. I think the focus should be on trying to understand how that works and maximize the kind of constructive potential, of course, while combating the hate speech and all the negativity there. So once again, thank you so much for everybody who joined, and we will have, of course, we'll continue our series, and we will have more announcements about the next topics in September, October, and moving forward. Thank you very much, and see you in a month.